should unmute myself. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, members and friends and guests of the German-American Business Council in Boston. My name is Emily Westhofen, and I'm the Executive Director of the German-American Business Council in Boston, also known as GABC. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to our fourth collaboration with our friends at the German-American Chamber of Commerce in New York and JP Morgan here in Boston on the German-American Business Outlook, or as it is also called, GABO 2022 and the New England edition. We were determined to bring you this event in person again, as we did previously twice, but the little O, known as Omicron, thwarted our plans. We're optimistic that we can soon offer in-person events again, as this wave, this Omicron wave, may be nearing or having already passed its peak here in Boston. We're hopeful. For those of you who are not familiar with GABO, it is one of our most popular and important events of the year, where we come together to look specifically at German companies and their outlook for the coming year here in the US market. And we do this with the help of KPMG Germany, who have partnered with the German-American Chamber of Commerce in New York to put together the survey of German subsidiaries. And many of you in the audience today have probably received that survey and also participated in it. And I look very much forward to hearing Andreas Glunz of KPMG Germany present the analysis that he and his team have put together. That presentation will be followed by a panel discussion with 3 executives from German subsidiaries and GABC member companies here in New England, who all represent very different industries. The service sector is represented through John Tesoro, CEO of TÜV Süd America. Electronic manufacturing will be represented through Frank Pfeiffer, CEO of Semicon, and life sciences through Sabine Haug, SVP of Leukocare, a company that just recently expanded into Massachusetts. Again, so my thanks go to the German American Chamber in New York, who presented actually the results of the survey to their audience and membership yesterday. And we appreciate the opportunity to share this outlook and add our New England perspective to it. But before we head into the specifics of the German companies, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. David Kelly to you. I will have Dr. Kelly come on video as well and join us. Dr. Kelly is the Chief Global Strategist and Head of the Global Market Insights Strategy Team for JP Morgan Asset Management. Dr. Kelly has written extensively on all aspects of the US economy. He is a frequent keynote speaker and guest on financial media outlets such as CNBC and Bloomberg. And he spoke to us actually at last year's GABO event, and we very much appreciate his return. I have a quick note to the audience. If you have questions, please put them into the chat. We will review and see that we can also post them, not only to Dr. Kelly, but also along our event, and we will definitely try and answer as we go along through the program. Dr. Kelly, the New York Times headlines stock markets off to the worst start since 2016 as Fed fights inflation. I hope you can frame the current roller coaster ride in the market within a little broader economic outlook. I know 15 minutes is not enough, but hopefully you can help us a little bit understand this, and maybe also attached with some good news.
Okay, well, thank you, Emily, and thank you all for having me at your meeting again this year. And I know Tatiana is going to move some slides from our guide to the markets. So I write something on LinkedIn every week, and a few weeks ago I talked about a very old quote from a Greek philosopher, Heraclitus, which is that a man never steps in the same river twice, because it's not the same river, but he's also not the same man. And I think that is very much the case when you look at the economy and look at investing beyond the pandemic here. 2 years ago, or just over 2 years ago, really the US economy was in a good place. It was kind of a boring place. It was in the tail end of a very long economic expansion. It was very quiet. Inflation was surprisingly low. Unemployment was very low, lowest in 50 years. And then we got hit by this massive explosion. These two huge seismic events, which were the pandemic and the policy response. And on this placid lake, it set up these huge waves. And so we've seen waves of economic growth, we've seen waves of the pandemic itself, we've seen waves of inflation. And I do think that as you look into 2022 and beyond, these waves will dampen down. But the waves of the pandemic have really altered the economy and indeed the investment environment. So what I want to talk about in very briefly here is how we think the investment environment looks right now in terms of the pandemic, fiscal policy, then economic growth, jobs, profits, inflation, and where the Federal Reserve is. And then I'd like to try and address any questions that we have time for. But if we move to the next page here, let me talk about where we are on the pandemic. So if Tatiana, if you could just move that to the next slide. Great. So the bad news is on the left-hand side. You can see just how huge the Omicron outbreak has been. It's been more than 3 times as big as the outbreak at the end of last year. A much more contagious, I mean, we already thought that COVID was contagious. It is, but this is a much more contagious variant. And the good news is that Omicron has crowded out Delta. There are virtually no Delta cases right now because Omicron is just so much more contagious a virus. And the other piece of good news, as you can see in the bottom right-hand side, is that it is less deadly. We've been tracking this very carefully over the last few weeks, and we're running at 30% the level of hospitalizations and 30% the level of fatalities that you would expect if these cases had been Delta cases or cases of an earlier variant. So it's milder, but boy is it contagious. Now what has happened is it's already down by 80% in New York from its peak, or in New York City from its peak. It's turned in Massachusetts also. It's going to keep on falling. We're down to about 650,000 cases. But there is the danger that it comes down to 100 or 50,000 or 100,000 cases per day and then stops falling because there's so many people who've been hiding from this virus. Yes, they're vaccinated, but it doesn't completely protect you. And it could be that we have the sort of lingering effect of people coming out of shelter and basically getting attacked by Omicron. So I think it'll have some lingering effect even if there isn't any further variants. There's also a great risk of Omicron hitting the Chinese economy at some stage if they relax their zero COVID policy at some stage, which they'll have to. And so there are I think the pandemic isn't quite over. But for the moment, you can say the effect of the pandemic on the economy is diminishing because we've all adapted to it and the economy can continue to grow. There has been an effect in January. We just got some very strong GDP numbers for the fourth quarter. That's not going to be repeated in the first. But broadly speaking, as this year goes on, I think the pandemic will have less of an impact. If we move to the next slide, the other thing that's going to happen though this year is we're going to have less fiscal stimulus. So you can see the budget deficit was 14 or 12.4% of GDP in the last fiscal year. Now US fiscal years end on September 30th. So in the current fiscal year, fiscal 2022, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that without any further legislation, the deficit will be about 4.7% of GDP. Right now, the President's Build Back Better plan is completely bogged down in Congress. We may get some partial version of this, but it won't amount to any fiscal stimulus. Because one of the things that Senator Manchin has made clear is he wants to pay for any government spending as you go. So if we do see stronger government spending, we'll also see higher taxes. So no more fiscal stimulus, and then we expect that the Republicans will take the House or the Senate later on this year, and that will put an end to fiscal stimulus for the rest of Joe Biden's term. So that's where we are in terms of the disease and fiscal stimulus. There's some good news in terms of Omicron fading in the months ahead, but the economy has lost some momentum here. Now, if you move to the next slide, we talk about economic growth, and you can see some of the wave pattern economic growth. They plunge in output, then a surge, then a slowdown, then a pickup in growth, then a slowdown. And now we just this morning got fourth quarter GDP numbers, 6.9% at an annual rate. So we picked up again. But as we look forward to the first quarter, I expect a number of close to 1% or lower. One of the things that happened in the fourth quarter is we rebuilt inventories at a rather fast pace. Now we've still got some ways to go, but if inventories grow more slowly from here, it will actually not add to economic growth. And we are seeing a significant impact on entertainment, leisure, business travel, and so forth in the first quarter from Omicron. So I think about 1% growth first quarter of this year. Then we'll bounce to about 4%. Maybe 5% in the second quarter, but thereafter growth is going to slow down. And the reason for that is on the next page. Because on the next page we show jobs. And the problem for everybody here is the unemployment rate is already down to 3.9%. Now in the last 50 years, the unemployment rate has been above 3.9% 96% of the time. So 3.9% is a very low unemployment rate. There are some people who are still held back out of the labor force because of the pandemic, but it's not as many as people think. There's a big squeeze on the American labor force because of lack of immigration and because of baby boomers hitting 65 and retiring. So we're not going to get that strong labor force growth. We'll get some bounce, which will enable the economy to grow by maybe 4% in the second quarter, maybe the third quarter, but then it will be at full employment. If the unemployment rate comes down to 3.5%, that's it. It's not going any lower than that. And because of that, growth will have to slow to about a 2% pace, we believe, by the end of this year going into next year. If you move to the next page, we show corporate profits. Profits very strong in 2021. We're just in the middle of the earnings season right now. Looks very good. There will be a squeeze in profitability this year. We know we're going to be facing higher wage growth. We're going to be facing higher interest rates. We're going to see a slowdown in nominal GDP growth. I mean, nominal GDP growth in the fourth quarter was about 11% annualized. It's going to slow. It may even be more than that. I have to just double check that number. But it will slow during this year, and that will be a drag on corporate profits. And we could get some tax increases if part of the president's Build Back Better plan is enacted. So I think profit growth overall will be mid to high single digits for 2022, but slowing as the year goes on. And then for 2023, low to mid single digits and maybe a negative if wage growth stays strong. If you turn to the next page on inflation, we have seen the inflation rate, the CPI inflation rate for December, 7.1% year over year. Of course, what the Federal Reserve looks at is the PCE deflator. That's their measure, and that will come in lower than 7.1% for December, but still it is well above the Fed's 2% target. We believe that as a matter of mathematics, most of this inflation is transitory. If the Fed's goal is a 2% number on the consumption deflator, and in the fourth quarter it was up about 5.5% year over year, a year from now, or even at the end of this year, we'll probably be closer to 2% than 5.5%. We do think that the supply chain issues will gradually get ironed out. New car prices may well come down in the year ahead. Used car prices almost certainly will come down in the year ahead. Oil prices, $90 a barrel on Brent, that's going to come down in the year ahead. And so when you look at all these issues as the world adjusts to a post-pandemic world, we think a lot of this inflation will come out of the system. But there's still some that will stay. There's going to be a chronic long-term labor shortage. That's going to keep wage growth high. We've seen big increases in home prices. That's going to keep rents high. And inflation expectations are a little bit more embedded right now. And so I do think that the consumption deflator, the core consumption deflator, will run closer to 3% than 2% at the end of this year. And that's going to keep the Fed tightening. And if we move to, actually, and this is the last slide I want to actually talk about on the next one here, just talking about the Federal Reserve. They met yesterday and put out a statement, which I think was pretty much as expected. But I just want to draw your attention to their forecast from December. So in December, they thought the year-over-year growth rate in GDP would be 5.5% for the fourth quarter, and they got that exactly right. It was 5.5%. They thought the unemployment rate in the fourth quarter would be 4.3%. Turns out it was 4.2% for the fourth quarter and 3.9% in December, so it was lower than that. And they thought headline PCE inflation would be 5.3%. Turns out it was 5.5%. So the economy is seeing a tighter labor market, and stronger inflation than the Fed even expected back in December. So what the Fed is going to do, I think they've telegraphed this very clearly yesterday, is they are going to end their bond buying program in the middle of March. They're going to put in a first rate hike, probably of 25 basis points in March. And if they follow precedent, they'll raise rates in March, in June, in September, and in December by 25 basis points each time. And then listening to Jay Powell yesterday in his press conference, it looks to me like they will start to reduce the size of their balance sheet starting in July. And so we expect that they will reduce their balance sheet perhaps by as much, when they're bringing it down a lot, they'll sort of taper up, we think. But when they're in full force of bringing down the balance sheet, it could be as much as $120 billion per month, which is the rate at which they increase their balance sheet at the height of QE. The bottom line is the Federal Reserve wants to do something about inflation. Inflation is not all their fault. In fact, I would argue that most of the inflation problem is not their fault. It has to do with too much fiscal stimulus and the disruptions caused by COVID. But the Federal Reserve gets the blame for this anyway, and they have pushed up asset prices too much. And so we think that they will pull back on monetary stimulus throughout this year, try to keep the yield curve steep. And so we think that they will try to push up long-term interest rates as well as short-term interest rates. So both in your investing plans and in your business plans, I think you have to bank on sticky inflation, not as high as it is right now, but some of it sticking around, interest rates moving up steadily, the economy hopefully maintaining economic growth and avoiding recession. But I must say the risk is that there is a greater risk of recession simply because the Federal Reserve often waits too long and then does too much. And I think one of the risks here is the Federal Reserve gets spooked by inflation and raises interest rates even more quickly than they seem to be outlining yesterday. So that's our overall outlook on the US economy. A slow growth, somewhat sticky inflation environment, higher rates, but still a continued expansion in 2022 and 2023. And I don't know if I've burned through all my time here, but I'd love to open up for any questions if you have some. Emily, are there any questions?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Kelly. Thank you. I haven't seen any. I think everybody is just trying to take that in, what you've just reported. I've made some notes, and I'm hoping that I've also, picked out some good news coming ahead. Obviously, that was a lot of information. Obviously, the risk of recession we've noted that, and that the inflation rates are hopefully just transitory, a word that I also picked up, and hopefully won't be as bad as you said. Maybe just a quick note from your end on, we obviously will be hearing from the German companies themselves, and also what KPMG has reported and what the German companies are saying. There is a good outlook in particular, right? And I think there might be a question that just came in. So why don't we pick on that as one of the questions? If the Fed did raise the rates faster than expected, what would be the consequence of that?
I think the consequence would be mostly on financial markets. I think it will hurt some of the more speculative names in financial markets, some of the large cap or mega cap growth companies who are selling at very high PE ratios. It obviously inflicts some losses on the bond market. But I don't think that it hurts business that much. And obviously, German companies operating in the United States, a lot of it is about capital goods, investment spending, equipment, and so forth. And I would expect that those industries will stay strong, because one of the results of a very tight labor market for a long time is everybody's going to be looking for ways of doing labor-saving equipment. So I think the demand for business equipment is going to be very strong. There also is a very strong pent-up demand for autos, which should be good for German automakers. They make wonderful cars, but you don't make enough of them, and so you're going to have to make more of them and send them over here, because there's a strong backlog of demand. So I think the interest rate increases will not be enough to really hurt the German sellers into the United States, exporters to the United States. I think it should be pretty good for this areas of business that Germany excels in.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I know our time is up and we have a lot to cover. I really do appreciate, again, Dr. Kelly, for you coming on today, sharing this with you. We will go through that again and have that information. And we're looking forward now to actually discussing that also with our panelists who will, I'm sure, have taken note on what you've said now and bring that into their outlook.
Well, thank you very much. And obviously, if anybody's got any questions, just reach out to anybody at JP Morgan and we will try and get those questions answered. But thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Kelly. We are moving on with our program, and this was fascinating and interesting. And we are now moving into a part where I would like to introduce Andreas Glunz of KPMG Germany, and he is right there. Thank you, Andreas, for joining us again today as well. We are happy to have you here and to present these survey results of the German companies that was done at the end of last year, and looking at the outlook of German companies here in the US. I would like to introduce you as the managing partner in charge of KPMG Germany's entire international business and all country corridors and country practices since 2015. You hold a German CPA, which is the Wirtschaftsprüfer and the German tax advisor, and audit mainly Japanese, US, UK, and Scandinavian groups since 2000 as an audit partner. And you've been with KPMG for a long time, and you've been working with the German Chamber in New York on this survey for a couple of years now as well. So welcome, Andreas Glunz. Thank you for sharing the results and the analysis. Let me know when you want me to share your presentation.
Yes, thank you very much, Emily, for your introduction, your kindness, and the close collaboration with the chambers in the US. And thank you for having me. It's a big pleasure being back, at least virtually, in Boston. So hopefully next time it will be possible to be physically in Boston again. So for us at KPMG, it's actually the 5th time that we are cooperating with the German American Chambers of Commerce in the US. And it is the 12th time that the chamber is undertaking the survey, and it's the 5th time that we are cooperating and presenting the results. So we are undertaking such kind of surveys not just in the US, but also in other regions of the world. So just last week, we also published our survey of German companies in China, together with the German Chamber in Beijing. That was also very interesting and a lot of interesting insights. And time by time during my presentation, I will also share some of the insights and compare that with the results that we've seen here in the US again. Apart from that, maybe before we are starting in, just to tell you the methodology of the survey. So it was undertaken in November, for the whole November, so ended on the 21st of November, and more than 100 German companies participated. So to put that into perspective, the overall number of German companies in the US is quite sizable. It's more than 5,000. So it's nonetheless, it's a good sample and good insights that we could gather from those. If we then jump into the presentation, maybe, then you would see that a lot of the topics that Kelly has presented beforehand are also mirrored in the survey. So we could see that the low unemployment rate is one of the topics. We did also see that rising GDP is one of the positive notes that can be seen in the survey. And also the rising prices is one of the concerns. So if we have a look maybe at the first slide, then you can see that the results of this year's GABO reveal that despite of all the challenges of the last 2 years, most surveyed companies had a successful year in 2021. And that is much more positive than it was in the previous year. So if you see that the net sales volume increased for 85% of the surveyed companies, that is double the size of last year. Also, profit after tax increased for 72% of the companies, which is also nearly double the size of last year. So all in all, it looks as if 2021 was a very successful year. And that's because of the economic environment, since the impacts of the pandemic have mainly been overcome, and also because of the serious efforts that the companies have undertaken. I will come to that a little bit later. And secondly, from our perspective, it is because of the political environment, so which improved considerably. So the regulatory environment is stable and reliable. Tariffs have been taken back, and there is an expectation in German companies that the transatlantic relations will improve further during the next couple of years. So what specifically have the German companies undertaken? So on the next slide, you will see that when we are asking what kind of activities have been done and what were the main topics where companies had progress, then you will see on the next slide that actually German companies started directly when the pandemic approached to undertake reorganization and restructuring projects. So 31% of the companies have taken those in 2020 already. So they tried to fix the organization and adjust their processes. And on the left-hand side, you can see the topics where they progressed most. So a lot of those are related to digitalization and automation projects in order to increase efficiency and decrease cost in the companies. And surely it is also about the number one topic, adjustment of the working model. So the whole work together became more virtual, more remote. Work from anywhere became the new normal, and rising connectivity was possible. So what then does it mean for the profitability of German companies? So on the next slide, we asked, what is the percentage of your profit after tax to your net sales in the US? And compared that with the results from previous year. So it can be seen that 88% of the companies are generating profits in the US market, and just 12% are generating negative margins. So the US market obviously is a very important market for German companies. And also this remains to be stable over time. We could also see that the layer where companies are generating more than 10% of profit margin did even increase by 6% points. So obviously it was a positive year, which actually was a little bit surprising for us to see, because we all are hearing about rising raw material cost, unavailability of raw material, rising logistic costs, which partly became 10 times higher than previously, and also rising labor costs because of the shortage of workforce. Nevertheless, because of the efficiencies that could be gained from the automation and digitalization projects, it was obviously possible for companies to decrease their costs and to keep the same level of profitability. And if we compare that with the results of the surveys that we have undertaken in China, then we can also see that the US business is even more profitable for German companies and groups than the China businesses. But of course, that is depending on individual industries and companies. So let's then have a look in front to the next year. So what is the assessment of German companies when they look to the year ahead? So the year ahead on the next page is a look with optimism and confidence. So we see that the expectation for the US economy as a whole is very positive. So 90% of the companies told us that they're expecting that the economy will rise. And thereof, 43% believe that it will even rise by more than 3% points, which is obviously consistent with also what Kelly told us beforehand. And the assessment of the own company is even better than that. So 93% expect a further increase, 80% an increase of the profit, and 78% would like to increase their investments in the US market. So if we compare that with the 2021 figures that we see, then we see that the net sales volume, the profit after tax, will rise even further in 2022 than in 2021. And if once again we compare it with the figures of German companies in China, then the assessment is much more positive. So German companies in China assume that the net sales volume will increase. Only 60% say so, and only 41% expected the profit will increase. And this is surely because the challenges that German companies are facing in the Chinese market are much more demanding, and a lot of them are driven by the regulatory environment in China. And topics that we hear in the Chinese market are topics like travel restrictions or preferential treatment of local companies or legal uncertainty. Those are the top 3 topics the German companies are stating in the Chinese market. All of them are not relevant in the US market. So obviously, German companies in the US can concentrate on operational topics instead of regulatory topics. And I think that is surely also one of the reasons why German companies are so positive, have such a positive view of the outlook for next year. Also, on the next page, you can see that they are intending to increase their workforce during 2022. And this is a sharp increase. So 67%, so the 50% and the 52% are intending to increase their workforce significantly. And that is also, once again, a significant increase from prior year when it was just 43%. So it is a short-term increase of the workforce that is intended. But although this is the strong demand of the German companies, you can see on the next slide that this is deemed to be the #1 challenge, the biggest challenge for German companies in the US market. So 75% of the companies are telling us they feel that this is the biggest topic for them to tackle. So they react by promoting apprenticeship programs and also trying to grasp as many people as possible in the market. But obviously, this is one of the difficulties. It might also be one of the triggers for the digitalization automation projects, because that, of course, can limit to a certain extent the need for additional workforce. But also we hear that 85% of the companies told us that they have experienced difficulties in attracting skilled workers in the market in 2021. And that is also up by 21 percentage points. Just to compare that once again with China, in China, 49% of the German companies are telling us that this is a challenge for them. So obviously, finding workforce in the US market is even more difficult than it is in the Chinese market. And the other 2 topics remain relevant: supply chains and COVID-19 pandemic, which are also interrelated to each other somehow. And from our perspective, and also looking at the results that we have seen in the Chinese survey last week, it seems to us that the risks of COVID are currently underestimated that may derive from the Chinese market. So in China, still Omicron has not yet arrived. And China is following a strict zero COVID strategy, has a quite poor local vaccine available. And also the healthcare system is in difficulties in the Chinese market, and it's not comparable with that of Western countries. It will mean that during a lot more months, China will remain very, very strict in the regulations. And that can easily mean that a lot of further lockdowns will come up, so that production facilities are being locked down, harbors are being locked down. And this will impact also the whole global value chain and the whole global markets. So, and this is also a reason why, from our perspective, German companies are telling us that for 54% of them, this still remains to be the biggest challenge, the supply chains. We'll come to that a little bit later again. On the next slide, we also asked what else is on their to-do list. And they told us that they have room for improvement, specifically, once again, with the resilience of the supply chains. But also, and that might be surprising from a German headquarter perspective, with cybersecurity. So this is also a very high rating, which we do not see in surveys in other regions of the world. So my take from that is this might be because of the recent cases in the US of cyber attacks, not just by individual criminals, but by states. So obviously there is an expectation that further cyber attacks might happen in the US that might derive from China or Russia or some other countries. And also on the right-hand side, I think this is also interesting, and that is also, if we compare it with other regions, we don't see such a high rating for purpose and corporate culture, that this is a topic for room of improvement. So what I understand and what we have seen also in the survey is that this might relate to the S in the ESG. So since a lot of companies are focusing on diversity projects, and this seems to be a specific topic in the US. So jumping to the next page, we also asked about the strategies to overcome the challenges of the supply chain disruptions. And we mainly see that this is consistent also with the results that we see in other regions of the world, that there is a trend towards stronger onshoring and localizing supply chains. So to build up production facilities in the markets where also the goods are being delivered, and also that additional resources and sources are being sought for in different markets. So that in case specific regions are getting into problems and troubles, that nevertheless multiple sources can be made use of. So, but I think it also means that all of this will come at higher cost, because all of this means that also duplication of processes are necessary. And I think we have seen some first cases also in the US where companies are moving certain production also to other regions to be closer to their customers. And this brings me then already to my last slide. So you see we have condensed the 40 pages of the survey into just nine slides. And here we asked what are the demands from the German government. And once again, we see that the elimination of trade barriers and removing tariffs is high on the agenda of German companies. And specifically also 23% told us that they would like the German and the US government also to restart the TTIP negotiations, which, as we are all aware, stopped in 2016. And obviously there are also a lot of chances for building up businesses on that. And one of the topics that could be tackled and could be taken up in those negotiations is the topic of a transatlantic Green Deal. So German companies are leading in that field, so of green energy, of renewable energy, and have a lot of experience and expertise in engineering of new solutions. So this is a topic where German companies also feel that they have a chance to build up businesses in the future. So with that, I'm just would like to hand over and hand back to Emily, and just stating that the whole survey, the comprehensive survey, can be accessed via KPMG's landing page, as well as the landing page of the German Chambers of Commerce. So thank you very much, and glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Yeah, I was going to point out, we will definitely share the results that the German American Chamber of Commerce in New York have published. That is available now. We will share that with all the attendees in a follow-up email to make sure that everyone receives that, because it's a lot broader than what you presented today. And thank you for doing that. We have one question that is going, a couple of questions that are actually going regarding the skilled labor. And I know this is something that we will be discussing in the panel discussion in a minute as well. But it's hard to probably answer that in one sentence. But what are American workers lacking in skills, if that's what the German companies are missing, or is it just a general lack of skilled labor that because there's so much demand? And I know,
honestly speaking, I wouldn't overemphasize the word skill. I would stronger emphasize the word workforce. So it's more a question of the number of workers that are available in the market in a situation where immigration in the US is at its lowest for a decade. And we've seen that the unemployment rate is the lowest since a long number of years. And I think the main topic for German companies is they would like to grow their businesses. They require further workforce for that. And this is one of the obstacles that could limit the chances for growing the business in the US. And I think this is also one of the topics which surely they need to take up. And coming back to the question of skills, I think the skills are changing to a certain extent, and that is because of all the digitalization, automation that is happening. And that requires changing skills and new kind of skills. So MINT skills are more demanded than ever. And that is surely something that also universities and education in the US should concentrate on.
Right. And I do want to point one thing out, that your report and your analysis is obviously, US wide. So that is, what companies throughout, German companies throughout the United States have been reporting. And I think what we're going now into our panel discussion with executives from New England, we'll be able to look a little bit in terms of, what are the opportunities or challenges that you presented from the report apply to New England. Most of them will probably, but maybe some are not. So that's going to be an interesting look. And I know the chamber in New York had a very engaging discussion yesterday with executives that they had in their panel discussion. So I would like to invite our panelists to come on video right now to start our discussion and discussing many of the questions that have been posted in the chat, but also I know you listened to Dr. Kelly, and I know you listened to Andreas Glunz, and it'll be a very interesting discussion. So I would like to welcome first the moderator for our business panel discussion today, Carlos Perez from JP Morgan. He is an industry executive in the multinational corporations group of middle market banking and specialized industries. And he has been with JP Morgan Chase for 10 years and has more than 16 years of finance experience. Carlos oversees the Northeast segment's coverage initiative of foreign-owned subsidiaries. Carlos, thank you for moderating our panel here today. On the panel will be John Tesoro, who is President and CEO of TÜV Südamerika. And I would also like to mention he is a board member of the GABC Boston. And TÜV Süd is a leading global service provider for testing, inspection, certification, and training that adds tangible value to customers and partners. And in this role, John provides senior leadership in strategic planning and deployment process, product innovation, organic growth initiatives, and lean operational execution. I would also like to welcome Frank Pfeiffer, who is President and CEO of Semicon Incorporated, which is part of a family-owned business with group headquarters in Nuremberg, Germany. And Mr. Pfeiffer has been serving at Semicon for over 16 years in various positions. And he's been heading the US production facility in New Hampshire since 2018. Welcome. And last but not least, I would like to welcome Sabine Haug, who used to head the R&D department for Leukocare previously, but she is now the Senior Vice President for Corporate Development. And in that role, she's responsible for aligning strategic and technical goals to provide customers with tailor-made solutions in the field of drug product formulation development for biopharmaceuticals, and Leukocare just recently expanded into Massachusetts. I would like to mention that all of you are also member companies of the GABC, so I would like to thank you for that. And with that, I will hand it off to Carlos to start our panel discussion.
Great. Thank you, Emily. And thank you to the German American Business Council for putting this together and our friends at KPMG Germany for the insights on the survey. And special thank you to our panelists, John, Sabine, and Frank. Look forward to the discussion. Feel free, as Emily mentioned earlier, to input your questions into the chat box, and we'll be happy to address them. So starting off, maybe John, we can go first and then go around the panelists. But can you share your view briefly? What are the top opportunities that you see and challenges that top of mind as an executive here for US multinational?
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. And again, thanks to everyone for joining and for the support of KPMG and JP Morgan and the German American Chamber. You know, it's great to be with you today. It's a topic that's on our minds as we launch into 2022. I mean, largely we share the optimism of Andreas's survey. From a couple different perspectives. Though I would say while we're optimistic, we share some of the challenges there in particular. Why are we optimistic? I mean, as a test, inspection, and certification services provider, we assist our customers with transitions that are related to safety and sustainability, supply chain disruptions, etc. Generally, our mission is to allow the safe adoption of new technology. And so the transitions that underlie the economic things that David Kelly talked about and that Andreas mentioned are some of the things that we support with our expert services. So if you've got a component that's no longer available in your solution, a semiconductor component, you need to qualify, test, and certify a replacement component. So that's an example. In addition, we've got transitions in digitalization, automation, sustainability, renewable energy. Those are all providing us with opportunities. That being said, where do we have the challenges? And it's, number one, as stated in the survey, is, access to expert services, the experts that, provide, the ability for us to work with a customer and come up with a safety or sustainability solution. So those are the challenges that we share. But largely we're optimistic about our, serving our customers and helping them get through these transitions.
Excellent. Thank you, John. Frank, perhaps you can give us a view from your vantage point.
For the semiconductor industry, you mean?
No, similar question. How does your company think about top opportunities and possible challenges that you're facing? Is it similar, or would you have anything additional to add from what was shared?
Well, I think I didn't get the full survey. I had to chime in later, but our top problem is supply chain. I heard that from Mr. Glunz. So this is something I would definitely share, and I would absolutely also share the future concerns about China, because they have a vaccine that doesn't work. They have an Omicron wave that will be headed there, and we are not maybe so much directly exposed to China, but our suppliers and sub-suppliers. So somewhere in the chain, there's one tiny little piece missing, and that will make the train stop. Workforce is for us not so critical. In New Hampshire, we didn't have a problem to fill vacant positions. I think it's a mix of company culture, payment, benefits. So we were pretty successful in that regards. But the supply chain is absolutely the top problem, and I don't call it opportunity, it's a problem.
Sure. Oh, thank you for that. Sabine, same question. Anything additional that you would add that's been shared by the panelists?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think Lukaku is an innovator in providing best-in-class drug product formulations to support our partners in the development of novel therapies. We saw a lot of them in the recent years, and especially in the US, there are many biotech and pharma companies trying to bring novel therapies to the market. And these modalities we can help our customers with to speed up the clinical development, to improve the stability. So there's a huge market for us, a huge opportunity to grow, but also there is a lot of competition. The Boston area where we are located since last year is a big hub. There are a lot of other companies, and therefore we definitely also see the challenge of the limitations in the talent pool. Although there are many universities as well working in this field related in that area, still we see much more demand than availability of people who are skilled and are trained in the area, and we do definitely need skilled people for the work we do. Supply chain has hit us quite a bit as well. Building up a lab means ordering a lot of equipment, a lot of materials, and it was really a challenge with learning late even, and that was another problem. You order material, but then only when it's up to be delivered, you learn, oh no, it will be delayed by 2 weeks and another 2 weeks and another 2 weeks. And we always try to find solutions to bridge the gaps. And there are a lot of companies extremely helpful to providers with interim solutions. But yeah, also for us, it's supply chain and labor, the main challenges that we see.
Thank you, Sabine. Sabine, sticking to you, the survey showed continued enthusiasm about German companies continue to invest in the US. 87% of the companies surveyed by KPMG showed that they're planning to continue investment into the United States over the next 3 years. Your company's in a particularly interesting position. You entered the market last year during what could be considered a turbulent year. So just curious on your view on what drove you to the US, particularly what drove you to the Boston area, and perhaps what were the challenges that maybe you faced that you didn't foresee because of just the COVID situation?
Yes, as said, the US market is extremely important in the biopharma area, generally for European tech companies. And a big driver in the US biotech market are especially the startup companies that we see, for example, in the Boston area in Massachusetts and related areas around. There are approximately 10 times as many preclinical programs, meaning early development programs for medicinal products running in the US compared to Europe. And they all need data and development in the area we are working in and what we can offer. So we think it's possible to serve these demands from Europe, but one can really enter a new market well locally. So we heard from our US-based customers that it would ease their business with us if we were present in the US. And that was the main driver why we decided to build a footprint there to support our US clients in the best possible way. That's why we are building R&D services and capacity in the US, but also supporting business functions to be close to our partners, to be able to visit face to face as far as COVID allows us to do, to be in the same or similar time zone. That also helps. And last not least, to avoid customs issues with materials that need to be exchanged. That is something we also faced before. So even more, we also selected a US investor for this step because we are convinced that developing a footprint in a new market should include all stakeholders, capital, shareholder structure, customers, personnel, and the business entity. And yeah, as I said, Massachusetts is perfect location with so many biotech and pharma companies there, minimal time difference to Germany, to Europe. What we learned and the challenges we faced, yeah, they are in all areas I tackled. First of all, the pandemic made things slower. So people were working with less capacity. So we needed to wait longer for things. That in general was something. Then the business environment is a bit different from Germany. Maybe other people listening here experience similar things. And it's very important, as we learned in the US, to have a really good network with established contacts. That was crucial. And our strategic alliance partner, Rentschler Biopharma, helped us tremendously. That was extremely important. Yeah, some other things, it was a challenge to find a PEO and HR service providers that would support a company without employees. So we started our processes before having hired someone, and we couldn't transfer from another company because we were not present in the US before. And it took us quite a while to find then eventually regional providers who are helping us. Another thing was building a bank account without a domestic banking history and with only foreign officers. So we think it's very helpful to have, if you start a company in the US, someone there that is local, has a social security number, and eases all these things, where we found a lot of hurdles and delays. And yeah, after all that were settled, we had difficulties setting up customer accounts with vendors because we couldn't provide references of vendors in the US, since we not even had started business at that time point. And here then prepayment solved the issue. So we tackled everything, we found solutions, but it came with some delays and also some more efforts than we had planned for. But the good thing is that the environment is extremely solution-oriented, optimistic, helpful, and everybody really tried to make everything go in. And that was a great experience.
Thank you, Sabine. Appreciate that insight. John, Too is a little bit more of a mature business across North America and South America. Maybe you can give us a view of how the market has evolved and how do you prioritize your continued investment in the region?
Yes. So, mature business, right? Tutsu's been around for over 150 years. That being said, fourth industrial revolution later, we continue to serve very dynamic markets. And as a result, our customers are expecting, solutions that require innovation on our part. And so, for us, the challenge is to keep pace with that innovation, and that's where our priorities, really rest. Expanding our services to meet the needs of our customers. And so, for example, and why are we so committed to the U.S. and to the Americas in general? Is because, these have been and remain the largest market opportunities for test, inspection, and certification services. And two great examples of that are here in the Boston area, life sciences and medical devices area. We are the largest notifying body for medical device services, and in addition to that, digitalization and robotics and automation, which I'll kind of put all in one bucket, are services that are really required, by our customers for safe adoption. So our experts work with our customers both in medical devices and in digital automation, innovation areas, to ensure that when they deploy a product into the marketplace, that it meets the safety expectations of their customers. And so we play that independent third party check on safe adoption of new technology in that way. And we're backing that up with with investments here in the US. We believe in, we're investing over the next 18 months $60 million into new laboratory facilities. One in the heart of the medical device marketplace in Minneapolis, where we're building a new biochemical testing lab where we'll test the latest medical devices for safety. And then in Michigan, in the heart of the move towards electric vehicles, we are building a $45 million production level electric vehicle battery testing facility to support the OEMs and tier ones in their transition from internal combustion engines to electric vehicle engines. We saw Tesla's results, record profits in the last 24 hours, 2 years of profitability. units up 87% in 2021, and they've got competitors chasing their heels. We've got 30 new electric vehicle models to be introduced in the U.S. market this year. And so demand for our services and our electric vehicle experts to ensure that those batteries that sit under the carriage of a vehicle are safe when they're, inevitably in accidents, and that, our first responders are safe when they approach a vehicle, electric vehicle that's been, so there quite a bit of opportunity, and that's why we remain, very optimistic and are backing that up with investment to support our customers.
Excellent. Thank you, John. Frank, maybe you can give us a view also, a bit of a more mature business across America, and how do you think about prioritizing investment, and how has the market evolved for your business?
Well, first I have to say, Semicron is in a niche of the semiconductor market. We are dealing with power semiconductors, which is not the main road, what you read in the newspaper every day about Intel, Apple, Samsung, and so on. But it's nevertheless a very important and strategic area of semiconductors, and you can see that also that countries like China put a very strong emphasis on this, because the power semiconductors are at the heart of renewable energy, of electric vehicles, and other future key technologies. So for example, if you look at an electric vehicle, our semiconductors are in the middle between the motor and the battery. I don't get any more technical than that, but it tells you that this is a key component. And this is also for us in the US here, like in other areas of the world for Semicron, one of the key development areas. So we see a lot of interest and growth opportunities in the electric vehicle market, not so much in the passenger vehicle market. It seems that the big three are a little bit behind there, and Tesla has their own solution anyway. But for electric trucks, for example, for USPS delivery vehicles, Amazon delivery vehicles, so this mid to large size vehicle market, mid to large size trucks, that's school buses is another great example. This is an extremely promising market for us, and we expect and plan for investments here in the next few years. It depends a bit on what projects and contracts we win, but there's a big pool, and we have a certain success rate, so we'll win some of them. And then there is a local content demand. I think that's also a part of the Biden administration's new packages. So government subsidies are tied to certain local content requirements. And that's also driving investments here in the US, because we don't get away if we tell our customers, yes, you can have that product, but it comes out of our German factory. So it needs to be from this side of the ocean.
Thank you for your view, Frank. I want to transition over to a topic that is we're all facing, right? Low unemployment, 3.9 historical lows, lack of immigration, as was touched on by Dr. Kelly. So the battle for talent is top of mind across for all of us. And the KPMG survey showed that German companies face more difficulties than ever in attracting talent. Can perhaps, John, you share your strategies for continuing to retain talent and also attract new talent? And maybe perhaps if you can give us a view how that's evolved from previously.
Yeah, it's certainly the number one issue when we don't ship components, we deliver services, and you need people to deliver that. So it's a very important issue to Zud. And I would say there are really 4 points that we put together as a plan to improve our execution in this area. And the first is that we really have a multi-point employee engagement plan. So everything from town hall meetings. We started to have in March of 2020, when we entered COVID protocol, which certainly exacerbated this issue in many ways, was a catalyst for something that was brewing, but really accelerated under COVID, we started to have weekly town halls, and we would have very, very high participation rates. We've subsequently, gone back to monthly town halls, but and we've supplemented that with other, venues for our employees to engage with each other. So we offset that town hall with where we have, guest speakers like customers and so forth to really engage with, our people. We supplement that with, what we call connect ups, which are the opportunity for open mics for our employees to share with each other. So that's point number one, a multi-point employee engagement. The second point is around workplace flexibility. One of the early things we did was to say, okay, with our employee base, we have a certain number of our employees that fall into a category where they can work from home 100%. Let's allow them to have that flexibility. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have labs, and in order to test a medical device, you've got to be in the lab. So those experts and technicians need to be in the labs 100%. And in between, we've got hybrid opportunities that we can afford to offer our employees. So the key there being flexibility, and I think this has really been appreciated by our employee base. The key word is flexibility there, especially with what they're facing on the home front with homeschooling, sick kids, parents, etc. I think that really that sense of empathy in that regard really resonated. And as a part of that, and a second effect was we just moved our headquarters in the Boston area, and given the kind of square footage needs we would have with this new work plan, we were able to lower our square footage for our headquarters by over 50%, thus making us even more sustainable in that regard. So that was kind of a secondary effect. Then of course you got to address comp and ben. Expectations are higher, 7% inflation. We saw it. We've got to address that fact. But I wouldn't underestimate the ben side. We're offering more flexibility on the benefits, and our team's done a real good job of examining that and offering new programs there. And then lastly, it was really mentioned in Andreas's survey results, connecting what we do to our purpose. And for us, it's a really straightforward. I mean, our services enable safe and sustainable community. So that is something that we try to do with our customers when we welcome them onto a town hall to show how they are now able to offer safer products, more sustainable products to their customers as well. So we're really communicating that at a higher level, connecting to the purpose, especially for the our more entry level and more junior associates on the team is extremely important.
Thank you. You hit on engagement and flexibility, and I think that's all that a lot of companies are trying to adjust to that. And on the benefit side, we're all the time when we're talking to our clients, they're reviewing 401k plans and thinking about how do I improve the overall employee experience. So great intel. Sabine, from an attraction of talent, anything that you would share of how Lukaku is addressing the labor shortage?
Sure, yeah. And a lot of things that we heard from John, we try to implement as well. We have developed as well, like flexibility, engagement, and working in the pharma area in building, supporting to get better medicines to the people. It's always something that helps to engage people working there. That we have a big benefit, I think, similar to what John experiences in his company. What we also try to do is during the interviews to really fastly grasp how a certain candidate is motivated. So what is it more on the financial side? Is it more on the engagement on the ethical side? Is it more like getting the flexibility in work with having, even with a lab job, the chance for some mobile work, since there need to be like reports and plans written. So this is really challenge, but also an opportunity for us in the recruitment process to attract the people to what we can offer. And since we are, I mean, a lot of companies in the Cambridge area have a huge background of venture capital, so the salaries are really going through the ceiling. We have to come up with a lot of alternative ideas as well. And something that also can work is the location of the company. John said they moved their headquarters. We are outside the Boston area, in the suburban country where housing is much more affordable, where you can even have a house with a huge garden. And that is also something that we hope attracts people to join us.
Thank you, Sabine. Frank, we've touched on immigration and the lack of immigration, and perhaps you can give us a view on access to work visas for foreign specialists. How is that a challenge for your business, and how are you trying to address it?
Well, it's absolutely zero right now. I mean, from personal experience, I can tell you. I mean, I'm a German citizen. I'm here on the basis of a visa, and I have 3 avenues that I follow through right now just to be able to continue to work. But if the processing times as they are continue like that, then I'll be out of here in a year from now. So that's just my personal story. But getting talent from abroad is very difficult because of these processing times. So far, we were successful to attract local talent. We have this is, I mean, beyond on top of what my other 2 fellow panelists mentioned. We introduced a college internship program, especially for the technical area, where we look for promising new engineers. But this is tapping the local talent pool. From international, it's very complicated.
Thank you. Sabine, we've touched a little bit in high level on supply chain challenges, and a big focus has been around the semiconductor and microchip space that's used broadly across all industries. How has that shortage impacted perhaps your industry, and how have you tried to address it?
Yeah, well, building a new lab means that we had to purchase a lot of equipment and instruments, and most of them are running with microchips. So yeah, definitely we were hit by that shortage with very long lead times, much longer than usual known. So we had to plan here differently than expected and originally done. And that extended several months in some cases. So what we can try to mitigate is to plan even longer than before, like do our budgets very early, plan early, place orders early, and try to stock as much as possible. And that is really a challenge for a company which business is mainly driven by contract projects. So yeah, it's a situation that is not the easiest one, and I'm really hoping that we will see an ease in that situation in the near future.
Thank you. John and Frank, I'm curious, you both touched the automotive space, and we've talked about inflationary pressures. I read an article the other day that's touching on a third of inflation is coming from the automotive space. A lot of it driven by the chip shortage. Many governments, including the U.S. government, are trying to address it through reshoring and giving financial incentives, such as the $20 billion plant that was recently announced by the Biden administration in Ohio. to address that chip shortage. So just curious, your view on what that's going to do for the industry, and perhaps is it something that, I know it's a little bit longer term, but is it something that should help in the overall effort?
Yeah, yeah, I think we have to distinguish here between the short-term symptom and the long-term strategic goal. What we see here right now, the chip shortage that we read about in the newspaper everywhere, and Sabine, I wish I had semiconductors for you. This is a symptom, yeah. And the semiconductor industry goes through the shortage cycle every other year, yeah, 3-4 years, sometimes something like that. And that is because of the really very expensive investments that are necessary for these fabs. These 20 billion that you talked about, that's probably good for 2 fabs. Yeah? So 10 per is roughly the going rate. Yeah? So whoever makes that decision for the investment has to be very sure that this capacity will be loaded short term. So that means they make this investment only at the last stage possible. So this cycle was about to begin in 2020, and then COVID hit, and then the market turned on quicker than expected. And then we all heard about the stories that the automotive companies placed their orders too late or canceled orders, and everything was funneled towards PlayStations and computers. This is only part of the truth, I think. The problem that we have right now is that when we entered that cycle, COVID came, and now we have the perfect storm. Yeah, because of that delay, the investments were delayed even further, and now we have that issue. And then also the semiconductor industry is now impacted by this overall supply chain problem. So if you want to build one of these $10 billion fabs, you need equipment, and that equipment has a lead time of 1 year, and now it's 2 years because they can't get whatever. Yeah, so this chain is very interwoven and complicated, and I think it will take a while until this is getting resolved. Yeah? And I think the resolution or the solution at the end will be if at some point supply starts to flow, yeah, people get less nervous, they take their buffers out. Yeah, everybody's working with buffers. Yeah, and that will be like a recession. Yeah, it looks like a major downturn then, but this is just to overcompensate that exaggeration, to compensate that exaggeration that we're looking right now. Yeah, so we are looking at book-to-bill ratios of 1.7. So that means we have 70% more orders in the books than we are fulfilling day to day. Yeah, so this has to be compensated at some point. So sorry, this is the short term. Yeah, long term, I think this initiative and to subsidize this industry and to have it local help, but from a different perspective. It will not help the next short term chip shortage that we will have in whatever 2026 or 7, but it will make sure that we retain talent, whether it's in the US or in Europe, because there's a race for these companies. Yeah, in Europe, they also try to bait Intel for their next fab location in Europe. So there's a race or for these subsidies. Yeah. So this will make sure that talent is there, that the ability is in the country, but it will not mitigate the next chip shortage. I'm almost 100% sure about this, because also these industries, if they sit in with their new fab in Ohio, it doesn't mean that all the material that they require comes from Ohio. There are special chemicals There are suppliers that are single source. A famous company is ASML in the Netherlands, which do the lithography equipment. They are single source worldwide. They will not move to Ohio. Huh? And so these dependencies will remain. But I think the big benefit is that the talent and the know-how will be local in the US, that we don't get too much dependent from Chinese or Taiwan companies. I think that's the key of that investment, and I think that's very important, and that's why I so support it. I think it's definitely the right thing to do.
I appreciate that. John, I'm going to go to a question that was posed by one of our attendees, and I think Frank touched on it a little bit, but what are the changes that you believe need to occur to make the supply chain system more robust?
Well, I think as was reflected in the survey, improvements in the trade relationships globally, right? And so accessing, the ability to access, points of sourcing that you couldn't access before, where trade, prevented an economic, was just, not feasible economically. So I think, that is an area, and then innovation. Innovating around your supply chain constraints. We saw that of the automotive manufacturers in the EV space. Tesla was able to do that, and there was the foundation of that is, and we see this. Frank alluded it to a little bit. If we just talk about semiconductors, right now in the automotive, and we serve the automotive electronics supply chain very, very specifically. And the uptake of electronics in cars to support highly automated driving, et cetera. And a lot of the things you see is driving uptake of semiconductors in the automotive space year in, year out. It's one of our fastest growing businesses. You also have new applications, like Frank mentioned, in regards to the transition to electric vehicles. And so what some of the more innovative companies are doing, and this is I think the best way to mitigate supply chain issues, is to innovate around it. So whereas in the past you might use two discrete semiconductor chips to perform a function for the car, you can then integrate those chips into one solution. And so we see a lot of our customers doing this, and finding perhaps instead of needing the bleeding edge of lithography, semiconductor lithography geometries, you could perhaps take a step back to a different geometry and find a lab that's actually available, and so forth. And so innovation is the #1 way to get around supply chain issues from our experience with our customers.
Excellent. Thank you for that view. Sabine, I'll touch on a topic that was probably third on the list as far as concerns, and something that we've been facing over the last couple of years, right? COVID, and how do you expect the business community to react to the continued uncertainty caused by COVID, and prepare for future disruptions? Possible disruptions, hopefully. Let me.
We all hope for that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that hope is reflected that contingency plans are mainly in the drawers, but currently being here in Germany, I see that I've taken out of those because of the high infection numbers we do have here at the time being. So yeah, I guess these contingency plans will be further elaborated to address situations when employees can't come on site. And so a lot of them were in home office, were in the process of returning back. And I think it will be like a kind of a back and forth between home and on site, given to the possibilities we will have. And I guess that's a digitalization of communication that has already been implemented in many businesses is absolutely crucial here and will help us. Also, what I guess is that people what I see is a trend away from just-in-time approach to mitigate supply chain issues. So company order more, stock more, need more warehouses, which again drives up the cost on space. And yeah, so this is what we do see. On the other hand, our business also gets a lot of positive impact, because in the biotech area, a lot of innovation is driven by the need of new medicines. And also this is something where the business community reacts with a lot of creativity, with a lot of innovation, developing new therapy models, new vaccine models, and bringing them to the market even faster. We see that also in the authorities that try to support. So I guess here a completely new spirit has evolved, which is great to see.
Great, thank you. I know we have about 3 minutes left before we wrap, but I will go to a question that was put in the chat box, and we'll post it to any of our panelists to answer. How do you evaluate the supply of critical raw materials such as metals in the US and the need for onshoring its manufacturing? And the follow-up question to that is, shall government subsidize these efforts?
Shoring, I mean, it's either, aluminum and copper are probably not the main critical materials. Rare earths are more critical because they can be only found in China and in commercially viable mines. Yeah, I think that's the bigger issue. And onshoring this is difficult because it's either there or not. Aluminum and copper, I think this goes back to trade restrictions. Yeah, I mean, there's an abundance of aluminum and copper available, but the previous administration tried to limit the supply, yeah, and then protect the local market. I think the market has to be open. It has to be accessible for everybody on a mutual basis. I don't think that there are any government subsidies necessary. It's just has to be open trade for these commodity metals.
Appreciate that. So I know we're probably 2 minutes away. I want to thank our panelists, John, Sabine, and Frank for your insights, and obviously Andreas and KPMG for the survey. Emily, I'll hand the floor back to you.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you very much to the panelists for making time today and sharing all these different perspectives. I think that's what we really enjoy about this event, to hear from, the different industries, small, large, very mature, John, as you said, to being around for a long time, and the manufacturing difficulties that might be here. We will have this panel discussion and this event taped and make it available also to those who may have had to jump off earlier or may have not been able to attend in the first place. So thank you very much. If anybody would like, thank you, Andreas. I also see you come on again. Thank you very much again for the survey results. To the attendees, we will share that with you in a follow-up email. And I definitely want to thank JP Morgan for supporting the event and for all our speakers.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
John.
Thank you, fellas. Nice job.
Day.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.